the legend, or are you the truth behind the legend? Now, tell me, who are you? I am Hercules!
Hercules, 2014, a comprehensive film analysis and explanation. Hercules, 2014, is an American action-adventure film directed by Brett Ratner that offers a distinctive and revisionist take on the legendary Greek hero, and these analyses and explanations will explore every facet of this ambitious production. The film distinguishes itself from countless other adaptations of the Greek myth by being based not on the original legends, but on the graphic novel Hercules. The Thracian Wars by Steve Moore, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this source material provides the foundation for a more grounded approach to the mythological hero. The film was produced by Flynn Picture Company and Radical Studios and distributed jointly by Paramount Pictures and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and these analyses and explanations will contextualize its place within the broader landscape of mythological epics. Notably, 2014 saw the release of two competing Hercules films, with the other being The Legend of Hercules starring Kellen Lutz, released earlier in the year to critical and commercial failure, making Ratner's film the more successful of the two, and these analyses and explanations will explore why this version resonated more strongly with audiences. The film opens with a clever narrative device that immediately establishes its revisionist approach, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the film uses storytelling to frame its central themes. The story reimagines the central figure not as a demigod son of Zeus, but as a weary mercenary haunted by a tragic past, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this characterization sets the stage for a more psychologically complex narrative. The opening sequence introduces us to the hero leading a small, elite band of warriors consisting of the prophetic seer Amphiaraos, the slick thief Autolycus, the feral warrior Tydeus, the skilled Amazon huntress Atalanta, and his storytelling nephew Iolaus. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this ensemble cast creates a dynamic that becomes the film's strongest asset. Tormented by the memory of supposedly murdering his wife and children in a fit of madness sent by the goddess Hera, the protagonist rejects his divine lineage and works only for gold. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this psychological burden drives the entire narrative forward. The mercenary band operates as a cohesive unit, their loyalty to one another providing the emotional core that traditional mythological epics often lack. And these analyses and explanations will examine the chemistry between the actors that makes this dynamic so compelling. The central conflict is introduced when the group is approached by Erginia, the daughter of the powerful Lord Hercules, the ruler of Thrace, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this initial contract sets the stage for the film's intricate plot. She hires them to train the Thracian army to defeat a terrifying warlord named Rhesus, who is rumored to be a centaur and a practitioner of dark magic, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the film plays with these mythological expectations before subverting them. The mercenary band accepts the contract and begins the arduous task of transforming the frightened Thracian soldiers into a disciplined fighting force, and these analyses and explanations will explore the training sequences that showcase both the tactical expertise of the group and the film's commitment to grounded warfare. The relationship between the protagonist and Erginia develops during this period, with hints of mutual respect and perhaps something more, though the film wisely keeps this subplot restrained, and these analyses and explanations will examine how their dynamic serves the larger narrative. The mercenaries bond with the Thracian soldiers, particularly young warriors who look up to them, creating emotional stakes for the coming battle, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these relationships pay off in the film's climax. The first major action set piece occurs when the newly trained Thracian army faces Rhesus's forces in a massive battle, and these analyses and explanations will examine the choreography and scale of this sequence. The battle is brutal, chaotic, and grounded in realistic combat tactics, with the central hero fighting alongside his men rather than performing supernatural feats, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this approach reinforces the film's revisionist philosophy. Rhesus is revealed to be a man, not a centaur, though he fights with such ferocity from horseback that the myth became understandable, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this revelation exemplifies the film's approach to debunking legend. The Thracians emerge victorious, capturing Rhesus and seemingly securing peace for Lord Hercules' kingdom, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this apparent victory sets up the film's central twist. The protagonist feels a sense of accomplishment, perhaps the first he has felt since the supposed murder of his family, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this emotional payoff is immediately complicated by what follows. The central twist is revealed when the hero discovers the terrible truth behind the war, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this revelation transforms the entire narrative. Rhesus is not the villain he was portrayed to be. Rather, Lord Hercules is revealed as a ruthless tyrant who has been conquering and burning villages to expand his empire, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this moral complexity elevates the film above simple good versus evil storytelling. Rhesus was simply fighting back to protect his people from Hercules' aggression, making the mercenary band unwitting pawns in a campaign of genocide, and these analyses and explanations will explore the weight of this realization for the protagonist. It is learned that Erginia is forced to obey her father out of fear for her young son Arius, the true heir to the throne, held hostage by Hercules to ensure her compliance, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this revelation recontextualizes her character. The mercenaries find themselves trapped in Hercules' fortress, stripped of their weapons and facing execution for their unwitting role in his crimes, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this desperate situation forces the central figure to confront his past. The emotional climax arrives when the protagonist is confronted by King Eurystheus, who reveals the truth about his family's death. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this confession liberates him from his guilt. Eurystheus explains that he drugged the hero years ago and had his family killed by 3 massive wolves, creating the hallucination of the 3-headed dog Cerberus that has plagued him ever since, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this revelation transforms his understanding of his own history. The madness he believed was sent by Hera was actually a drug-induced nightmare, and the monsters he thought he fought were merely men and beasts given mythological proportions by terrified survivors, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this twist completes the film's deconstruction of myth. Freed from the burden of guilt that has weighed upon him for years, the central figure finally embraces his true strength, not as a demigod, but as a man liberated from psychological chains, and these analyses and explanations will explore the power of this moment. He breaks his chains with seemingly superhuman force, though the film wisely leaves ambiguous whether this is divine heritage or simply the strength of a man freed from doubt, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this ambiguity serves the film's thematic purposes. The most cathartic moment occurs when the hero saves Virginia from execution and confronts the three massive wolves that killed his family, and these analyses and explanations will explore the symbolism of this confrontation. These wolves are not supernatural creatures but real animals, yet they represent the mythological monsters that have haunted his psyche, and these analyses and explanations will examine how killing them serves as a form of psychological exorcism. The wolves are dispatched with brutal efficiency, demonstrating that the monsters of the past are finally conquered, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this sequence provides closure for his character arc. He then rallies Rhesus's freed prisoners, former villagers whose homes were destroyed by Cody's armies, to join him in a final assault on the tyrant's fortress, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this leadership role represents the protagonist embracing his heroic destiny on his own terms. The prisoners, who have every reason to fear and hate outsiders, trust him because they recognize in him a fellow victim of Cody's cruelty, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this connection reflects the film's themes of shared humanity. The spectacular climax builds as the hero leads the assault on Cody's fortress, and these analyses and explanations will examine the battle sequences that showcase the film's action choreography. The mercenary band fights alongside the freed prisoners, their skills complementing the raw vengeance of those who have lost everything to Cody's tyranny, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this alliance represents the triumph of justice over oppression. Tydeus, the feral warrior who has struggled with his violent nature throughout the film, sacrifices himself in a moment of redemption that provides the battle with genuine emotional stakes, and these analyses and explanations will examine how his death affects each member of the mercenary band. The protagonist fights his way through Cody's elite guards, his movements combining raw power with tactical intelligence that reflects his years as a mercenary commander, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this combat style distinguishes him from more superhuman portrayals. The battle reaches its zenith when he confronts Cody's himself, the tyrant hiding behind his soldiers while claiming divine favor from Hera, and these analyses and explanations will examine the contrast between true and false leadership that this confrontation highlights. The defining moment arrives when the central figure uses his superhuman strength to topple a massive statue of Hera, crushing Cody's and his remaining army, and these analyses and explanations will explore the profound symbolism of this act. The statue represents the goddess he believed cursed him with madness, the divine figure he blamed for the murder of his family, and by using it as an instrument of destruction against his enemy, he symbolically rejects that guilt forever. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this action completes his psychological journey. He does not pray to the gods for aid or credit them with his victory. Instead, he takes full responsibility for his actions and their consequences, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this autonomy represents the film's humanistic philosophy. With the tyrant dead and his army crushed beneath the fallen goddess, the surviving people of Thrace bow to the hero, recognizing in him a liberator rather than a mercenary, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this public recognition differs from the legendary fame he previously rejected. Young Arius, Ergenia's son and the true heir to the Thracian throne, is placed in power with his mother as regent, ensuring that Cody's tyranny will not simply be replaced by another warlord, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this resolution reflects the film's political themes. The film concludes with the protagonist and his surviving mercenaries riding away from Thrace, having refused the throne and the rewards offered them, and these analyses and explanations will examine the significance of this choice. Peace has been found with the past and strength has been embraced, but the central figure remains a wanderer rather than a king, suggesting that his journey of self-discovery is ongoing rather than complete, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this open-ended conclusion respects the character's complexity. The band of brothers, diminished by Tydeus's sacrifice but strengthened by their shared ordeal, rides toward new horizons and new contracts, their bond deeper than ever, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this ending emphasizes the found family theme that runs throughout the film. Iolaus, the nephew and storyteller, continues to narrate his uncle's deeds, though now the stories reflect truth rather than exaggeration, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this narrative frame bookends the film's exploration of myth versus reality. The final shots emphasize the camaraderie and humor that have defined the mercenary band throughout their adventures, suggesting that whatever challenges await them, they will face them together, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this emphasis on relationships distinguishes the film from more solitary heroic narratives. The central premise fundamentally deconstructs mythological expectations, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this approach both succeeds and divides audiences. The 12 labors are shown in the opening scene as a campfire story told by Iolaus to intimidate enemies, immediately establishing that what we are about to see will not be a traditional mythological epic, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this framing device prepares viewers for the revisionist narrative to follow. The monsters of legend are revealed to be exaggerations of real threats. The Nemean lion was simply a large beast that the hero killed, its fearsome reputation growing in the retelling. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this rationalization reflects the film's commitment to grounded storytelling. The Hydra was a simple snake that was claimed to have multiple heads to make the story more impressive. The centaurs were merely skilled riders on horses whose silhouette suggested half-man, half-beast creatures to terrified observers, and these analyses and explanations will examine how each debunking serves the film's thematic purpose. This humanizing of legend received mixed reactions from audiences and critics, with some appreciating the fresh, intelligent take, while fans of traditional mythology felt it diminished the character's core identity as a demigod son of Zeus. And these analyses and explanations will explore both perspectives on this creative choice. The burden of guilt versus the possibility of redemption serves as the central thematic concern, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this psychological framework elevates the film above typical action fare. The narrative is driven entirely by the protagonist's psychological trauma, his strength functioning not as a divine gift but as a curse tied directly to his perceived sin of filicide, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this internal conflict creates a more complex protagonist than traditional mythological heroes. His journey throughout the film is not about slaying external monsters, but about confronting his past, learning the truth about his family's death, and clearing his name of the crime that has haunted him. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this internal focus distinguishes the film from more straightforward adventure narratives. The moment when the truth is learned from Eurystheus represents not just the resolution of a plot mystery, but the liberation of his psyche from chains that have bound him for years. And these analyses and explanations will explore the emotional power of this revelation. The final act of using the statue of Hera, the goddess blamed for his supposed madness, to destroy his enemy is a powerful symbol of him rejecting that guilt entirely and reclaiming his own narrative from divine interpretation. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this symbolic action completes his arc. The Band of Brothers theme distinguishes the film from solo hero narratives, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this ensemble approach enriches the storytelling. Unlike traditional mythological epics that focus exclusively on the central hero, this film dedicates substantial screen time to developing each member of the mercenary crew, giving them distinct personalities, skills, and emotional arcs, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this investment pays dividends throughout the narrative. The chemistry between the actors, particularly Dwayne Johnson, Ian McShane, and Rufus Sewell, is frequently cited as the film's strongest asset, their camaraderie and witty banter providing both humor and emotional weight that makes audiences genuinely care about their fates. And these analyses and explanations will explore specific scenes that exemplify this dynamic. Each mercenary contributes something essential to the group. Amphiaraos provides wisdom and prophecy, Autolycus contributes cunning and thievery, Tydeus offers ferocity in battle, Atlanta brings hunting skills and ranged combat, and Iolaus supplies storytelling and moral support. And these analyses and explanations will examine how these complementary skills create a functioning team. When Tydeus sacrifices himself in the final battle, the loss resonates not just because of the character himself, but because of the hole he leaves in this found family. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this emotional impact demonstrates the success of the ensemble approach. Dwayne Johnson in the title role received a performance that was universally praised by critics and audiences alike, and these analyses and explanations will examine what made his portrayal so effective. Johnson's physical presence is undeniable, his imposing physique making him completely believable as a legendary warrior. But he also brought surprising solemnity and charm to the role that prevented the character from becoming a one-dimensional brute, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this combination of attributes serve the narrative. Reviewers consistently noted that Johnson possesses an affable, guileless screen persona that makes audiences root for him, even when his character is making questionable choices. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this natural likability supports the film's redemption narrative. As one IMDb review noted, Johnson looks good, has great physical presence, and even when the part is somewhat darker than usual, he remains very likable, a quality essential for a character carrying the weight of supposed filicide. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this balance of darkness and charm is achieved. Johnson brings physical authenticity to the action sequences while also delivering the emotional beats with sincerity, creating a protagonist who feels both superhuman and deeply human. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this duality reflects the film's revisionist philosophy. A stellar supporting cast brings depth and humor to the mercenary band, and these analyses and explanations will explore each performance in detail. Ian McShane as Amphiarose is a scene stealer, providing most of the film's humor and wisdom through his wry observations and running joke about his prophecies being based on probability rather than divine insight, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this character embodies the film's rationalist approach to mythology. Rufus Sewell brings charisma and wit to Autolycus, the thief whose skills prove essential to the group's survival and whose cynical exterior masks genuine loyalty to his comrades. And these analyses and explanations will explore how Sewell's performance adds texture to every scene he inhabits. Axel Henny portrays Titius as a man barely containing his violent nature, his struggle to control his impulses creating a poignant subplot that culminates in his redemptive sacrifice. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this arc adds emotional weight to the action. Ingrid Bolso-Bertel brings physical presence and quiet dignity to Atlanta, the Amazon huntress whose skills with a bow and spear make her invaluable in battle, while her calm demeanor balances the group's more volatile personalities. And these analyses and explanations will explore how her performance expands representation in the genre. Rhys Ritchie as Iolaus serves as the audience surrogate and storyteller, his admiration for his uncle providing the narrative frame through which we understand the legendary status. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this character connects the grounded reality of the film to the mythological tradition it deconstructs. John Hurt appears as Lord Codes, delivering a wonderfully scene-chewing performance as the duplicitous villain, and these analyses and explanations will explore how his presence elevates the film's antagonist. Hurt brings decades of acting experience and gravitas to the role, making Codes a genuinely threatening figure whose charm masks profound evil. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this complexity makes him a worthy opponent for the protagonist. The character's manipulation of his own daughter and grandson, holding them hostage to ensure compliance with his schemes, establishes his villainy in deeply personal terms that resonate beyond generic evil. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this familial angle connects to the hero's own family trauma. Codes' speeches about power and destiny reveal a man who genuinely believes in his right to rule through any means necessary, making him a philosophical opponent as well as a physical one, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this intellectual dimension adds depth to the conflict. Hurt's final scenes, as Codes realizes his plans have failed and his goddess statue becomes his tomb, showcase the actor's ability to convey rage, fear, and disbelief in equal measure. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this performance caps the film's villain arc effectively. Joseph Fiennes portrays King Eurystheus in a performance that was widely criticized, and these analyses and explanations will examine the reasons for this negative reception. Many critics found Fiennes' portrayal to be catastrophically bad to the point of unintentional comedy, with his over-the-top delivery undermining the dramatic weight of his crucial revelation scene. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this performance compares unfavorably to the more restrained work of the principal cast. The character's confession should be a moment of profound emotional impact, the revelation that years of guilt and suffering were based on a lie. But Fiennes' histrionic approach risks turning tragedy into melodrama, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this tonal disconnect affects the scene. Some reviewers suggested that the performance might have worked in a different film, one more aligned with traditional mythological excess, but within the grounded revisionist approach, it feels jarring and out of place, and these analyses and explanations will explore this contextual criticism. Despite this weakness, The revelation itself remains powerful because of Johnson's reaction to it, suggesting that the scene's emotional core survived the performance issues. And these analyses and explanations will examine how the film's strengths compensated for this casting weakness. The film received mixed reviews from critics, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 58% based on 123 reviews. And these analyses and explanations will examine the critical consensus in detail. The Rotten Tomatoes consensus states that the film has Brett Ratner behind the cameras and Dwayne Johnson rocking the loincloth, delivering exactly what any reasonable person reading that description might expect, suggesting that it succeeds at being exactly what it promises. And these analyses and explanations will explore whether meeting modest expectations constitutes success. On Metacritic, the film holds a score of 47 out of 100, indicating mixed or average reviews, with critics divided on whether the revisionist approach adds depth or simply undermines the mythological appeal, and these analyses and explanations will examine the arguments on both sides of this divide. Audiences were slightly more receptive, giving the film a B+ cinema score, suggesting that general viewers responded more positively than professional critics to the blend of action and humor, and these analyses and explanations will explore this gap between critical and audience reception. The mixed reception reflects the film's ambitions. It attempts something different with familiar material, and while not everything works, the attempt itself earns respect from some viewers while alienating others who preferred traditional mythology, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this tension shaped the film's legacy. Specific praise was received for several elements, even from mixed reviews, and these analyses and explanations will explore what critics consistently identified as strengths. Dwayne Johnson's charisma and performance were nearly universally praised, with even negative reviews acknowledging that he brings authenticity and likability to a role that could have been one-dimensional, and these analyses and explanations will examine how his star power elevates the entire production. The surprisingly funny and witty script, particularly the dialogue among the mercenary band, received consistent acclaim for providing humor that felt organic rather than forced, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific examples of this writing. The chemistry of the main cast, their interactions feeling genuinely warm and lived in, was frequently cited as the film's greatest asset, transforming what could have been generic action scenes into character moments, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this chemistry was developed. The well-choreographed large-scale battle sequences, particularly the initial confrontation with Rhesus's army and the final assault on Cody's fortress, impressed critics with their scale and clarity, and these analyses and explanations will explore the fight choreography in technical detail. Specific criticisms appeared consistently across negative and mixed reviews, and these analyses and explanations will examine these weaknesses honestly. The generic plot, despite its twist, follows a predictable structure that offers few surprises for viewers familiar with action cinema conventions, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this predictability undermines the film's more innovative elements. The misleading marketing, which promised mythological monsters and epic fantasy, set up expectations that the revisionist approach deliberately subverted, leaving some viewers disappointed that they didn't get the traditional experience, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this marketing disconnect affected reception. The weak CGI in some scenes, particularly certain wide shots and creature effects, detracted from the immersion, reminding viewers of the film's budget limitations, and these analyses and explanations will explore which effects worked and which fell short. The lack of emotional depth or connection to actual Greek mythology frustrated purists who felt the film could have balanced revisionism with respect for source material, and these analyses and explanations will examine whether this criticism is fair given the film's stated intentions. The film performed modestly at the box office, grossing $244 million worldwide against a production budget of $100 million. And these analyses and explanations will examine the financial context of this performance. The film opened in second place behind Lucy in its opening weekend, suggesting strong but not spectacular initial interest from audiences, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this positioning affected its long-term box office trajectory. Domestic grosses reached $72.7 million, while international markets contributed $172.1 million, demonstrating the film's stronger appeal overseas where mythological epics often perform well. And these analyses and explanations will examine the international box office dynamics. The $100 million budget, modest by modern blockbuster standards, allowed the film to turn a profit even with mixed reviews, suggesting smart financial planning by the production team. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this budget was allocated across production elements. Compared to the competing Legend of Hercules film, which cost similar money and grossed significantly less, Ratner's version was clearly the commercial success of the two, validating the revisionist approach from a financial perspective, and these analyses and explanations will examine this comparative success. The film draws directly from the graphic novel Hercules, The Thracian Wars by Steve Moore, and these analyses and explanations will explore the relationship between source material and film adaptation. The graphic novel presents a gritty, realistic version of the ancient world, stripping away supernatural elements to focus on political intrigue and human conflict, providing the foundation for the film's revisionist approach, and these analyses and explanations will examine how faithfully the film adapts this vision. Interestingly, the original author Steve Moore requested his name be removed from the credits due to a payment dispute with the production, a situation that created controversy during the film's release, and these analyses and explanations will explore the ethical implications of this dispute. Moore died shortly after making this request, adding a tragic dimension to the situation, and the film was ultimately dedicated to him despite the credit removal, suggesting a complex relationship between creator and production, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this dedication functioned. The graphic novel format, with its emphasis on visual storytelling and panel composition, influenced the film's approach to action sequences and character introductions, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific moments where this influence is visible. Historians have examined the film for its accuracy regarding ancient warfare and military tactics, and these analyses and explanations will explore what experts have concluded. Several inaccuracies have been pointed out in the film's depiction of military equipment, tactics, and ancient political structures, noting that Hollywood often prioritizes visual impact over historical precision, and these analyses and explanations will examine specific examples of these inaccuracies. However, Dr. Roel Konij-Nendik, an expert in ancient warfare, praised the film's core principle of phalanx warfare, the idea that soldiers fighting together in formation using interlocked shields become stronger than individuals fighting alone, and these analyses and explanations will explore why this concept resonated with military historians. While the specifics of how the Thracian army is trained and deployed are flawed, the underlying concept of cooperative fighting as a force multiplier was appreciated by experts as reflecting actual ancient military philosophy, and these analyses and explanations will examine this distinction between specific errors and conceptual accuracy. The film's emphasis on mercenary culture and the political complexities of ancient Greek city-states, while simplified for dramatic purposes, captures something of the historical reality that warfare was often conducted by professional soldiers serving various masters, and these analyses and explanations will explore this historical context. The film functions best as a sword and sandals popcorn movie rather than a faithful mythological epic, and these analyses and explanations will explore what this classification means for understanding the work. The term sword and sandals refers to a genre of films set in classical antiquity, often emphasizing action and adventure over historical or mythological accuracy, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this film fits within that tradition. The film succeeds on the merits of its charismatic lead Dwayne Johnson, whose presence elevates material that might otherwise feel generic, and these analyses and explanations will explore how star power compensates for script limitations in this genre. The entertaining dynamic of the mercenary team provides the emotional engagement that mythological spectacle alone cannot sustain, making viewers care about characters beyond their ability to fight monsters, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this character focus distinguishes the film from pure action fare. By choosing to deconstruct myth and ground the story in a more realistic world, even one that is historically shaky, the film offers a unique take that distinguishes it from countless other adaptations, and these analyses and explanations will explore whether this uniqueness compensates for what it sacrifices in mythological grandeur. The film may disappoint purists who seek gods and monsters in their mythological epics, and these analyses and explanations will explore the validity of this disappointment. For viewers raised on tales of Zeus's demigod son performing impossible labors against supernatural foes, A protagonist who is merely a strong man fighting human enemies can feel like a diminishment of the character's essential nature, and these analyses and explanations will examine this perspective with respect. The film deliberately chooses to prioritize psychological realism over mythological fantasy, suggesting that human strength and courage are more meaningful than divine intervention, and these analyses and explanations will explore whether this trade-off justifies itself artistically. Some critics argued that the film could have balanced both approaches, retaining the supernatural elements while grounding them in human psychology, creating a more satisfying experience for all audiences, and these analyses and explanations will examine whether such a balance was possible. Ultimately, the film delivers exactly what it promises: a fun, action-packed, and surprisingly funny summer blockbuster that uses the legend as a launching point for something new, and these analyses and explanations will explore whether viewers who accept this premise will find the experience rewarding. Themes of truth and storytelling are explored throughout the narrative, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this meta-commentary enriches the viewing experience. Iolaus functions as a storyteller within the film, his tales of the famous labors growing more elaborate with each telling, representing the process by which legend emerges from fact, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this character embodies the film's interest in narrative construction. The film itself becomes a meditation on how history becomes myth, how ordinary events transform into legendary tales through repetition and exaggeration, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme connects to broader questions about human storytelling. The protagonist's rejection of his legendary status, his insistence that he is merely a man doing a job, represents a philosophical position that values truth over fame, reality over reputation, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this position informs his character arc. The final image of the mercenary band riding away while Iolaus tells their story suggests that the process of myth-making continues regardless of anyone's wishes, that legend will always transcend truth, and these analyses and explanations will examine the wisdom of this conclusion. The nature of heroism is examined through the protagonist's journey from guilt-ridden mercenary to genuine liberator, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this character development defines the film's moral vision. The central figure begins the film working only for gold, refusing any higher purpose or moral responsibility, his trauma having convinced him that he is unworthy of noble aspirations, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this cynicism serves as psychological defense. His discovery that he has been fighting for a tyrant forces him to confront the consequences of his moral detachment, recognizing that refusing to choose sides is itself a choice with real-world effects, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this realization initiates his transformation. The decision to fight for Rhesus's people, to liberate those oppressed by Codes even without payment, represents the protagonist embracing a heroic identity on his own terms, not as a demigod fulfilling destiny, but as a man choosing to do right, and these analyses and explanations will examine the significance of this choice. His refusal of the throne at film's end suggests that heroism is not about power or position, but about action and intention, that true heroes serve others without seeking reward, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this conclusion reflects classical heroic values while updating them for modern audiences. Themes of family, both biological and chosen, are addressed throughout the narrative structure, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these relationships drive character motivation. The protagonist's trauma centers on the loss of his biological family, his wife and children whose deaths he believed himself responsible for, creating a void that nothing has filled, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this absence shapes his interactions with others. The mercenary band functions as a found family, each member bringing their own wounds and strengths to create something stronger than any individual, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this dynamic compensates for what each has lost. Ergenia's relationship with her son Arius, held hostage by her father to ensure her compliance, represents the dark side of family bonds, how love can be exploited by the powerful, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this subplot connects to the central family trauma. The final restoration of Arius to his rightful throne, with Ergenia as regent, suggests that healthy family relationships can form the foundation of just governance, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this political dimension connects to the personal. Leadership is depicted through several contrasting examples, and these analyses and explanations will examine what the film suggests about power and its proper use. Lord Cody's represents tyrannical leadership, ruling through fear, manipulation, and violence, holding even his own family hostage to maintain control. And these analyses and explanations will explore how his eventual downfall illustrates the weakness of this approach. Rhesus embodies leadership born of necessity, a warlord protecting his people from aggression, his ferocity in battle matched by genuine concern for those under his protection. And these analyses and explanations will examine how his character complicates simple distinctions between hero and villain. The protagonist demonstrates leadership through example, fighting alongside his men rather than commanding from safety, earning loyalty through shared risk rather than demanding it through authority. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this style distinguishes him from traditional commanders. The mercenary band functions as a leadership collective, with each member contributing expertise and making decisions together, suggesting that diverse perspectives create stronger outcomes than solitary rule. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this collaborative model reflects modern leadership thinking. Visual storytelling techniques reinforce the film's thematic concerns, and these analyses and explanations will explore the cinematography and production design. The color palette shifts from the muted earth tones of the mercenary camp to the golden opulence of Cody's fortress, visually distinguishing the authentic from the artificial, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this contrast supports the narrative. The battle sequences are shot with handheld cameras and close framing that emphasizes chaos and confusion, placing viewers in the midst of combat rather than observing from above, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this immersive approach differs from traditional epic staging. The design of the mercenary characters reflects their personalities and skills, from Amphiara's weathered robes to Atlanta's practical leather armor, creating visual shorthand for who they are, and these analyses and explanations will examine the costume design in detail. The statue of Hera that dominates Cody's fortress looms over every scene set there, a constant visual reminder of the divine authority the tyrant claims, making its eventual destruction all the more satisfying, and these analyses and explanations will explore how production design supports this symbolic payoff. The musical score by Fernando Velázquez supports the film's emotional and action beats, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the music functions. The main theme combines traditional orchestral elements with ethnic instrumentation, suggesting the ancient world, creating a sound that feels both epic and grounded. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this balance reflects the film's revisionist approach. Softer moments, particularly scenes exploring the protagonist's trauma or the camaraderie of the mercenary band, receive gentle melodic treatment that allows emotional beats to land without manipulation. And these analyses and explanations will explore specific cues that enhance these scenes. The battle sequences feature driving percussion and brass that build tension and excitement, supporting the action without overwhelming it, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the score interacts with sound design in these moments. Velázquez's score received positive attention from critics who appreciated its restraint and thematic coherence, suggesting that musical elements contributed significantly to the film's overall effectiveness, and these analyses and explanations will explore why the music worked when other elements received mixed responses. Editing techniques shape the viewer's experience of action and character, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the film was assembled. The opening montage of the 12 Labors, presented as Iolaus' campfire story, uses rapid cutting and stylized imagery to distinguish legend from the more grounded reality that follows, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this editing establishes the film's central tension. Battle sequences favor longer takes and wider shots than many modern action films, allowing viewers to follow the choreography clearly rather than cutting rapidly to obscure limitations. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this choice reflects confidence in the stunt work. Character scenes employ classical coverage and patient pacing, letting actors' performances breathe without excessive interruption. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this approach serves the ensemble cast. The revelation sequence, in which Eurystheus confesses the truth, uses close-ups and reaction shots to maximize emotional impact, and these analyses and explanations will explore how editing choices either supported or undermined this crucial scene. The film demonstrates the evolution of the sword and sandals genre in the 21st century, and these analyses and explanations will place the work within this broader context. Earlier epics like Ben-Hur and Spartacus emphasized scale and spectacle, using thousands of extras and massive sets to create immersive ancient worlds, and these analyses and explanations will examine how modern films balance practical and digital elements. The 2000s saw renewed interest in the genre with films like Gladiator and Troy, which combined historical drama with modern action sensibilities, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this film builds on or departs from these predecessors. The revisionist approach, stripping away supernatural elements to focus on human conflict, represents a departure from mythological epics like Clash of the Titans while connecting to historical dramas like Alexander. And these analyses and explanations will examine this generic positioning. Contemporary audiences have different expectations for action choreography, character development, and moral complexity than viewers of earlier eras, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this film responds to these evolved expectations. The film addresses themes of truth and deception that resonate throughout the narrative, and these analyses and explanations will examine how characters navigate these issues. Cody's entire rule is built on deception, presenting himself as a benevolent leader while secretly waging war on innocent populations, and these analyses and explanations will explore how his lies ultimately destroy him. The protagonist's journey is fundamentally about discovering the truth of his past, moving from self-deception about his guilt to acceptance of the reality that he was a victim rather than a perpetrator, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this truth-telling liberates him. Eugenia's deception of the mercenary band, while initially seeming villainous, is revealed as a desperate attempt to protect her son, complicating simple judgments about honesty and its alternatives, and these analyses and explanations will explore this moral complexity. The film suggests that while deception may serve short-term purposes, truth ultimately prevails and provides the only foundation for genuine peace and justice, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme connects to the larger narrative. The portrayal of women in the film, while limited, offers some progressive elements worth examining, and these analyses and explanations will explore gender representation. Atlanta stands as an equal among the mercenary band, her skills respected without question and her gender never treated as remarkable, representing a matter-of-fact approach to female warriors that feels refreshing, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this characterization avoids common pitfalls. Eugenia functions as more than a love interest or damsel in distress, her political situation and maternal concerns driving significant plot developments, though her agency is limited by her father's control, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the film balances strength and vulnerability in her character. The film passes the Bechdel test with scenes where Atlanta and Eugenia discuss strategy and survival, demonstrating awareness of gender representation even within a male-dominated genre, and these analyses and explanations will examine the significance of this inclusion. However, the film remains predominantly focused on male characters and their relationships, reflecting the source material's origins and the genre's conventions, and these analyses and explanations will explore whether this focus represents a limitation or simply a choice. The film's treatment of violence and its consequences deserves examination, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the action sequences serve thematic purposes. Unlike many action films that present violence as exciting and consequence-free, this film shows the aftermath of battle, the dead and wounded, the cost of war on ordinary people, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this realism grounds the spectacle. Titius's struggle with his violent nature, his fear that he is becoming a monster, represents the psychological toll that constant combat takes on warriors, adding depth to a character type that often remains one-dimensional, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this subplot comments on the nature of violence. The protagonist's journey from using violence for profit to using it in service of justice suggests a moral framework for judging when force is justified, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the film navigates this ethical territory. The final battle, while spectacular, is presented as a necessary evil to overthrow a greater evil, not as an end in itself, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this framing distinguishes the film's violence from mere exploitation. The film's pacing and structure follow classical three-act storytelling conventions, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this familiar framework serves the narrative. The first act establishes the protagonist's world, his trauma, his mercenary band, and the initial contract that sets events in motion, efficiently introducing characters and stakes within a compressed time frame, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this setup prepares viewers for what follows. The second act develops the training sequences, the battle with Rhesus, and the discovery of Cody's deception, building complexity while maintaining momentum through action and revelation, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the midpoint twist reorients the narrative. The third act delivers the escape from captivity, the rallying of allies, and the final assault on the fortress, providing the cathartic resolution that the setup promised, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the climax pays off established themes. This classical structure, while predictable, provides a solid foundation for the film's innovations in character and theme, allowing audiences to engage with familiar patterns while encountering fresh content, and these analyses and explanations will examine whether this balance succeeds. The film's dialogue deserves attention for its wit and character revelation, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific examples that demonstrate this strength. Amphiarosa's running commentary on probability and prophecy provides consistent humor while also expressing the film's rationalist philosophy. Lines about the likelihood of survival based on statistical analysis becoming running jokes, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this dialogue serves both comic and thematic purposes. The banter among the mercenaries reveals their relationships and histories through subtext rather than exposition, creating a sense of long acquaintance without lengthy flashbacks, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific exchanges that accomplish this efficiently. The protagonist's dialogue evolves from terse cynicism to more open expression as he sheds his guilt, his words reflecting his psychological journey without announcing it directly, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this verbal arc supports the performance. Villainous dialogue for Cody's reveals his worldview without making him cartoonishly evil, his justifications for tyranny sounding almost reasonable in context, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this complexity elevates the conflict. The film's production design creates a believable ancient world within budget constraints, and these analyses and explanations will explore how practical sets and locations establish authenticity. The Thracian villages and fortresses feel lived in and functional rather than merely decorative, suggesting real communities with histories beyond the frame, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this verisimilitude supports the grounded approach. Costume design distinguishes the mercenary band from both the Thracian soldiers and Cody's courtiers, their practical gear reflecting their profession, while also revealing personality through details, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific costume choices and their meanings. The statue of Hera, central to the climax, required significant design work to feel both impressive as a monument and plausible as something that could be toppled, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the design team solved this challenge. The film's color grading shifts between locations and moods, from the warm tones of campfire scenes to the cold oppression of Cody's fortress, using visual language to reinforce emotional states, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this cinematographic choice supports storytelling. The film's sound design contributes significantly to its immersive quality, and these analyses and explanations will explore how audio elements enhance the experience. Battle sequences feature complex layers of clashing weapons, shouted commands, and the cries of wounded men, creating a chaotic soundscape that places viewers in the midst of combat, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this audio approach differs from cleaner, more stylized action films. The voice of the protagonist is mixed to convey his physical presence, the weight behind his words matching the weight of his actions, and these analyses and explanations will explore how sound editing supports Johnson's performance. Ambient sounds of camp life, birds, wind, and water establish the world's reality during quieter moments, providing contrast to the intensity of battle sequences, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this dynamic range serves the narrative. The roar of the toppling statue in the climax required careful design to convey both physical mass and symbolic significance, and these analyses and explanations will explore how sound effects contributed to this memorable moment. The film's release strategy and marketing campaign shaped audience expectations and reception, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these factors affected the film's legacy. Trailers emphasized action and hinted at mythological monsters, setting expectations for a traditional epic that the revisionist approach deliberately subverted, creating disappointment for some viewers who felt misled, and these analyses and explanations will examine whether different marketing might have better served the film. The competition with the other Hercules film released earlier in 2014 created confusion in the marketplace, with some audiences uncertain which version they were seeing or intending to see, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this competition affected both films' performances. International marketing emphasized different aspects of the film depending on regional preferences, with some territories highlighting the star power of Johnson, while others focused on action spectacle, and these analyses and explanations will examine how these variations reflected global audience expectations. The film's home video release and subsequent streaming availability have allowed it to find new audiences who may approach it with different expectations than theatrical viewers, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the film's reputation has evolved since initial release. The film's place within Dwayne Johnson's career arc deserves examination, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this role fits his development as a leading man. Johnson had spent years building action star credentials, while also demonstrating comedic ability in films like The Other Guys, and this role allowed him to combine physical presence with dramatic weight and wry humor, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this combination prepared him for even bigger successes. The film arrived during a period when Johnson was transitioning from ensemble player to solo lead, proving his ability to carry a large-scale production while surrounded by strong supporting performers, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this experience informed his subsequent choices. His willingness to play a darker, more psychologically troubled character than his typical heroic roles suggested range that would serve him well in more dramatic projects, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this performance expanded audience perceptions of his abilities. The film's modest success, while not a blockbuster, demonstrated Johnson's international appeal and provided evidence for studios that he could anchor franchise-level productions, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this contributed to his eventual superstardom. The film's approach to mythology reflects broader trends in 21st-century storytelling, and these analyses and explanations will explore how it connects to contemporary narrative preferences. The deconstruction of heroic myths, the emphasis on psychological realism, and the questioning of legendary narratives all align with modern sensibilities that favor complexity over simplicity, and these analyses and explanations will examine how the film participates in this cultural moment. Similar revisionist approaches appear in other genres, from superhero films that question vigilantism to westerns that complicate frontier mythology, suggesting a widespread cultural appetite for interrogating traditional stories, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the film connects to these parallel movements. The film's treatment of trauma and its effects reflects increased cultural attention to mental health and psychological wounds, making the protagonist's journey resonate with contemporary audiences in ways traditional mythology might not, and these analyses and explanations will examine this contemporary relevance. The balance between honoring source material and updating it for new audiences represents a challenge that many adaptations face, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this film navigates that tension compared to other mythological adaptations. The film's legacy within the sword and sandals genre remains modest but significant, and these analyses and explanations will explore how it has influenced subsequent productions. While no direct sequels were produced, the film's approach to grounding mythology has been echoed in other projects that seek to find human stories within legendary frameworks, and these analyses and explanations will examine examples of this influence. The film's emphasis on ensemble dynamics rather than solo heroics has influenced subsequent action films that prioritize team interactions over individual feats, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this approach has spread through the genre. The commercial performance demonstrated that mid-budget mythological epics could still find audiences, encouraging studios to continue developing projects in this vein despite the dominance of superhero franchises, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this market validation affected production trends. The film's critical reception, while mixed, established parameters for what audiences expect from revisionist mythology, informing subsequent projects about what works and what doesn't in this approach, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these lessons have been applied. The film's treatment of historical and mythological sources raises questions about adaptation and interpretation, and these analyses and explanations will explore how filmmakers balance these elements. The decision to base the film on a graphic novel, rather than directly on Greek mythology, represents a choice to prioritize a specific creative vision over traditional source material, and these analyses and explanations will examine the implications of this choice. Elements of actual Greek mythology, such as the names of characters and references to the 12 labors, are incorporated but reinterpreted through the film's revisionist lens, creating a hybrid approach that acknowledges tradition while departing from it, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this hybridity functions. The film's ancient setting is rendered with attention to period detail in some areas while taking liberties in others, reflecting the common tension between historical accuracy and dramatic necessity, and these analyses and explanations will examine where the film prioritizes each value. The question of whether adaptations owe fidelity to their sources remains debated among critics and audiences, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this film contributes to that ongoing conversation. The film's cinematography by Dante Spinati brings visual distinction to the production, and these analyses and explanations will explore his contributions. Spinati, known for his work on Heat and The Insider, brings a classical approach to composition and lighting that elevates the material beyond typical action film visuals, and these analyses and explanations will examine specific shots that demonstrate his craft. The use of natural light in exterior scenes creates authenticity, while the controlled lighting of interior sets establishes mood and hierarchy, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these choices support the narrative. The widescreen compositions emphasize the scale of battles and the isolation of characters within vast landscapes, reinforcing themes of individual struggle against overwhelming forces, and these analyses and explanations will examine how framing choices communicate meaning. Spinati's collaboration with Ratner, while unexpected given their different reputations, produced a visually coherent film that benefits from his experience and skill, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this creative partnership functioned. The film's stunts and practical effects deserve recognition for their contribution to the action sequences, and these analyses and explanations will explore the work of the stunt team. Johnson performed many of his own stunts, bringing authenticity to fight scenes that digital effects cannot replicate, and these analyses and explanations will examine how his physical commitment enhances the action. The battle choreography emphasizes practical combat over CGI spectacle, with stunt performers executing complex sequences that feel grounded and immediate, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific moments where this approach succeeds. The use of practical sets and locations for action scenes, rather than relying entirely on digital environments, creates a tangible reality that CGI cannot match, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this choice serves the film's aesthetic. The final sequence involving the toppling statue required careful coordination of practical effects, stunt work, and digital enhancement to achieve safely while maintaining visual impact, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this integration was accomplished. The film's exploration of political themes, while secondary to character development, offers commentary on power and governance, and these analyses and explanations will examine this dimension. Cody's tyranny is presented as fundamentally illegitimate not because of his methods alone, but because he rules for himself rather than for his people, his concern for his own power overriding any genuine service to Thrace, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this critique of selfish rule functions. The Thracian people's willingness to follow the protagonist after Cody's fall suggests that legitimate authority derives from popular recognition rather than force or inheritance, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this democratic implication emerges from the narrative. The restoration of Arius to the throne, with Erginia as regent, represents a compromise between hereditary succession and popular will, suggesting that tradition and justice can be balanced, and these analyses and explanations will explore the political philosophy this resolution implies. The mercenary band's refusal of political power, their choice to remain outsiders despite the opportunity to rule, comments on the relationship between those who fight and those who govern, and these analyses and explanations will examine the implications of this choice. The film's treatment of disability and difference deserves examination, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these themes are addressed. Amphiaraus's age and apparent physical frailty contrast with his mental sharpness and combat effectiveness, challenging assumptions about value and contribution, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this representation functions. Titius's struggle with his violent nature, His fear that he is fundamentally broken can be read as a metaphor for mental health challenges, and his redemption through sacrifice offers a complex message about finding meaning despite one's limitations, and these analyses and explanations will explore this reading. The protagonist's psychological trauma functions as an invisible disability, affecting his choices and relationships in ways that others cannot see, and the film's resolution suggests that acknowledging and addressing such wounds is possible. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this portrayal compares to other filmic treatments of trauma. The inclusion of diverse body types and abilities within the mercenary band, from the aged seer to the feral warrior to the skilled huntress, suggests that strength takes many forms, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this diversity enriches the narrative. The film's use of humor to balance darker themes represents a conscious tonal choice, and these analyses and explanations will explore how comedy functions within the narrative. Amphiarosa's wry observations about probability and survival provide levity without undermining the stakes, his humor arising from character rather than situation. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this integrated approach differs from forced comic relief. The banter among mercenaries during quiet moments establishes their relationships while providing audiences with breathing room between action sequences. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this pacing strategy serves the overall structure. The protagonist's deadpan responses to the legends told about him create running jokes about the gap between reputation and reality, reinforcing the film's thematic concerns while generating laughs, and these analyses and explanations will examine specific examples of this humor. The balance between comedy and drama, action and reflection, creates a varied viewing experience that prevents tonal fatigue, and these analyses and explanations will explore how the film maintains this balance throughout its runtime. The film's ending, while satisfying in narrative terms, leaves certain questions unresolved, and these analyses and explanations will explore what remains open to interpretation. The question of whether the protagonist possesses genuine divine heritage or merely human strength enhanced by psychological liberation is never definitively answered, leaving audiences to draw their own conclusions, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this ambiguity serves the film's themes. The future of the mercenary band, while suggested through their continued journey, remains unspecified, allowing viewers to imagine their adventures while recognizing that this particular story has concluded, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this open ending functions. The relationship between the protagonist and Ergenia, hinted at but never developed, remains ambiguous, suggesting that romantic resolution is not necessary for narrative satisfaction. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this restraint respects the characters. The ongoing process of myth-making, with Iolaus continuing to tell stories, suggests that the legend will evolve beyond the truth we have witnessed, leaving the relationship between history and narrative perpetually unsettled. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this meta-commentary provides a fitting conclusion. The film's approach to character development extends beyond the central protagonist to create a richly textured ensemble, and these analyses and explanations will examine how each mercenary receives moments of depth that transcend typical action movie archetypes. Amphiaros functions as the group's moral compass and comic relief simultaneously, his wry observations about the probability of survival serving both to entertain and to ground the fantastical elements in rational thought, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this duality makes him memorable. Autolycus presents a facade of cynical self-interest that gradually reveals genuine loyalty to his companions, his thieving skills proving essential to the group's survival, while his emotional vulnerability emerges in quiet moments between action sequences. And these analyses and explanations will examine how Sewell's performance navigates this complexity. Tydeus embodies the tragic warrior archetype with fresh authenticity, his struggle to contain his violent nature, creating constant tension that pays off in his redemptive sacrifice. And these analyses and explanations will explore how Henny's physical performance conveys internal conflict without extensive dialogue. Atlanta represents a model of integrated female presence in action cinema, her skills respected without comment on her gender, and her relationships with male companions based on mutual respect rather than romantic tension. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this matter-of-fact approach advances representation. Iolaus serves as the audience's entry point into this world, his admiration for his uncle balanced by genuine awareness of Hercules' flaws, creating a narrator who loves his subject without idealizing him. and these analyses and explanations will explore how this narrative framing device enriches the viewing experience. The film's examination of trauma and its psychological effects provides unexpected depth for an action blockbuster, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this theme manifests throughout the narrative. Hercules carries the weight of his family's supposed murder like a physical burden, his movements and expressions conveying years of guilt without requiring extensive expository dialogue. And these analyses and explanations will examine how Johnson's physical performance communicates this internal state. The recurring nightmares of Cerberus represent the psychological manifestation of his trauma. The three-headed dog symbolizing the three wolves that killed his family, while also representing the threefold nature of his guilt. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this visual metaphor operates throughout the film. His refusal to embrace his legendary status stems not from humility, but from self-loathing. His belief that he is a monster making him reject the heroic identity others wish to bestow upon him. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this psychological motivation drives his character arc. The revelation of Eurystheus' deception functions as therapeutic intervention, freeing Hercules from false guilt while forcing him to confront the real tragedy that his family died because of his fame rather than his madness. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this complexity deepens the emotional impact. The final battle becomes not merely physical confrontation but psychological exorcism. His destruction of Hera's statue, representing rejection of the divine framework that has defined his suffering. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this symbolic action completes his journey toward wholeness. The film's revisionist approach to mythology extends beyond surface-level debunking to engage with deeper questions about how legends form and function, and these analyses and explanations will explore this philosophical dimension. Iolaus' storytelling serves multiple purposes within the narrative, intimidating enemies, entertaining allies, and gradually building the reputation that will become Hercules' enduring legend. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this meta-narrative comments on the construction of heroism. The film suggests that myths arise from genuine events filtered through human perception and memory. The Nemean lion becoming more formidable with each retelling until it transforms from large beast to supernatural monster. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this theory of mythological origins reflects actual historical processes. Hercules' discomfort with his own legend reflects a psychological truth about those elevated to iconic status. The gap between public perception and private reality creating alienation that fame cannot bridge. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme resonates beyond the film's ancient setting. The final image of the mercenary band riding away while Iolaus tells their story suggests that the process of myth-making continues regardless of the protagonist's wishes. That narrative will always transcend truth. And these analyses and explanations will explore the bittersweet implications of this conclusion for anyone seeking authentic recognition. The film's action choreography deserves detailed analysis for its emphasis on practical combat over CGI spectacle. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this choice serves the revisionist aesthetic. The training sequences with Thracian soldiers emphasize formation fighting and shield work, demonstrating that military effectiveness derives from cooperation rather than individual prowess. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this philosophy reflects the film's thematic concerns about community and collaboration. The initial battle with Rhesus's forces eschews slow-motion heroics in favor of chaotic realism, with soldiers falling, regrouping, and falling again in ways that convey the brutality of ancient warfare. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this approach distinguishes the film from more glamorized depictions of combat. Hercules' fighting style combines raw power with tactical awareness, his size making him formidable, while his experience makes him intelligent, creating a combatant who overwhelms opponents through both strength and strategy. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this combination reflects his character development. The final assault on Codys' fortress integrates the mercenary band's varied skills into a coordinated attack, each member contributing their expertise to create a whole greater than any individual. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this ensemble action sequences the film's Band of Brothers theme. The practical stunt work, with Johnson performing much of his own physical action, creates authenticity that digital enhancement cannot replicate, grounding spectacular moments in tangible reality. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this choice supports the film's overall aesthetic. The film's examination of political power and its corrupting influence provides substantial thematic content beneath the action surface. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this dimension functions. Lord Codes represents the tyrant who has governed so long that he has come to believe his own propaganda. His speeches about destiny and divine favor revealing genuine conviction in his right to rule regardless of the cost to others. And these analyses and explanations will examine how Hert's performance conveys this self-deception. The Thracian people have suffered under Codes' rule for years before the film begins, their oppression normalized to the point that resistance seems impossible. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this background establishes the stakes of liberation. Rhesus emerges as a genuine alternative to Codes' tyranny, a leader who fights not for conquest but for protection, his ferocity in battle matched by genuine concern for his people's welfare. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this contrast complicates simple hero-villain binaries. Ergenia's position as daughter of the tyrant yet mother of the true heir places her in impossible circumstances. Her compliance with her father's schemes motivated by love for her son rather than approval of Codes' methods. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this moral complexity enriches her character. The resolution, placing young Arius on the throne with Ergenia as regent, suggests that legitimate rule requires both hereditary claim and popular acceptance, a compromise between tradition and justice that reflects the film's nuanced political vision. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this ending avoids simplistic revolutionary fantasy. The film's visual aesthetic creates a coherent world that supports its narrative ambitions, and these analyses and explanations will explore how cinematography and design achieve this unity. The Thracian landscape shifts from the rugged authenticity of village settings to the oppressive grandeur of Codes' fortress, the visual contrast reinforcing the thematic opposition between natural community and artificial power. And these analyses and explanations will examine how location choices support this dichotomy. The color palette evolves throughout the film, the muted earth tones of the mercenary camp giving way to the golden opulence of the tyrant's hall, then returning to natural colors during the final liberation, creating a visual journey that mirrors the narrative arc. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this chromatic strategy guides audience response. Lighting design distinguishes between the harsh realism of daylight battles and the psychological interiority of nighttime scenes, with Hercules' nightmares rendered in shadowy contrast that suggests their subjective nature. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this visual language communicates internal states. The statue of Hera dominates the fortress's visual space, its constant presence reminding viewers of the divine authority Codes claims, while also foreshadowing its eventual destruction. And these analyses and explanations will explore how production design plants the seeds of later payoff. Costume design for the mercenary band reflects their individual personalities while maintaining visual cohesion, their practical gear suggesting professionals who prioritize function over fashion. And these analyses and explanations will examine how these choices support character differentiation. The film's treatment of loyalty and betrayal weaves through every relationship, creating a network of trust-tested and sometimes broken. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this theme operates. The mercenary band's loyalty to one another provides the film's emotional foundation, their willingness to risk death for comrades demonstrating that found family can be as powerful as biological bonds. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme distinguishes the film from more individualistic heroic narratives. Ergenia's apparent betrayal of the mercenaries, leading them into Codes' trap, is revealed as desperate protection of her son, complicating simple judgments about treachery and forcing viewers to consider circumstances when evaluating actions. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this moral complexity enriches the narrative. Codes' betrayal of his own people, burning villages he should protect to expand his power, represents the ultimate perversion of leadership, his treachery motivated by greed rather than necessity. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this contrast with Ergenia's constrained choices illuminates different forms of betrayal. Eurystheus' betrayal of Hercules, drugging him and murdering his family, stands as the original sin that has shaped the protagonist's entire adult life, its revelation forcing complete reevaluation of everything Hercules believed about himself. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this ultimate betrayal structures the entire narrative. The prisoners who join Hercules' final assault must decide whether to trust an outsider after suffering under their own leaders. their choice to follow representing faith in a different kind of loyalty, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this collective decision advances the film's themes. The film's soundscape contributes significantly to its immersive quality and emotional impact, and these analyses and explanations will explore the audio elements in detail. The clang of weapons against shields in training sequences establishes the physical reality of combat before battle begins, conditioning audiences to the sounds that will dominate action scenes, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this audio preparation functions. The roars of the three wolves that killed Hercules' family, heard first in nightmare and later in reality, create audio continuity between trauma and resolution, their sound design emphasizing their animal nature while suggesting the monstrous form they took in legend, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this duality serves the film's themes. Ambient sounds of camp life, birdsong at dawn and crackling fires at night, establish the world's reality during quieter moments, providing contrast that makes battle sequences more impactful, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this dynamic range serves narrative pacing. The score by Fernando Velázquez weaves thematic material through the film, character motifs developing alongside their arcs and battle music building tension through rhythmic complexity, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific cues that enhance emotional moments. The mix balances dialogue clarity with environmental immersion, ensuring that character interactions remain intelligible even during chaotic action. A technical achievement that supports the film's emphasis on relationships, and these analyses and explanations will examine how sound design prioritizes this balance. The film's pacing demonstrates careful attention to audience engagement across its runtime, and these analyses and explanations will explore how structure serves the narrative. The opening act efficiently establishes character, conflict, and theme within the first 30 minutes, using the campfire storytelling sequence to convey background without exposition, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this economy serves the film's ambitions. The training sequences provide breathing room between action set pieces while developing the relationship between mercenaries and Thracian soldiers, creating emotional stakes for the coming battle, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this character investment pays off during later conflicts. The midpoint revelation of Cody's deception reorients the narrative just as audiences might anticipate the story's direction, subverting expectations while deepening thematic complexity, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this structural choice maintains engagement. The escape and rally sequences build tension progressively, each obstacle overcome revealing a new challenge, creating escalating stakes that culminate in the final assault, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this accumulation drives toward climax. The denouement allows for emotional resolution without excessive lingering, the mercenary band's departure suggesting continuity beyond the frame while providing closure for this chapter. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this balance between conclusion and continuation serves the film's themes. The film's engagement with classical heroic values while updating them for contemporary audiences creates productive tension, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this negotiation functions. The Homeric ideal of the hero seeking immortal glory through deeds receives explicit rejection from Hercules, who wants only to work for gold and be left alone, his trauma having convinced him that fame brings only suffering, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this rejection comments on traditional heroic narratives. Yet the film ultimately affirms heroic action when motivated by justice rather than glory. Hercules' choice to fight for Rhesus's people representing embrace of responsibility without expectation of reward, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this modified heroism reflects modern values. The emphasis on collective action over individual achievement updates classical heroism for an era skeptical of lone saviors. The mercenary band demonstrating that cooperation achieves more than solitary prowess, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme resonates with contemporary audiences. The restoration of legitimate rule through popular uprising rather than divine appointment suggests democratic values absent from ancient sources. The film's political resolution reflecting modern assumptions about legitimate authority, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this updating serves the narrative. The tension between honoring source material and adapting it for new audiences creates creative friction that generates the film's distinctive identity, neither rejecting tradition entirely nor slavishly following it, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this balance produces something genuinely original. The film's minor characters, though briefly sketched, contribute to world building and thematic development, and these analyses and explanations will explore their functions. The Thracian soldiers who train with the mercenaries represent ordinary people caught in conflicts not of their making. Their gradual transformation from frightened conscripts to confident warriors providing a parallel arc to the larger narrative, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this everyman perspective grounds the epic events. Rhesus's followers, though appearing only briefly, convey the humanity of those fighting against Cody's expansion, their desperate resistance making clear that this is a war of survival rather than aggression, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this characterization complicates initial expectations. The prisoners liberated from Cody's dungeons represent the accumulated victims of tyranny, their numbers and condition testifying to the scope of his crimes. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this visual evidence strengthens the case for rebellion. Young Arius, though appearing in few scenes, functions as both plot device and symbol, his innocent face representing the future worth fighting for and his threatened life motivating his mother's difficult choices. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this dual function operates. The guards and servants of Cody's court, glimpsed in background moments, suggest the apparatus of tyranny and the many complicit in its maintenance, their presence raising questions about ordinary people's responsibility under oppressive regimes, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this background detail enriches the political dimension. The film's treatment of death and sacrifice refuses easy sentimentality while acknowledging genuine loss, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this balance is achieved. Titius's death in the final battle carries emotional weight precisely because his struggle with violence has been developed throughout, his sacrifice representing mastery of the nature that haunted him. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this character arc makes his end meaningful rather than merely convenient. The deaths of unnamed soldiers on both sides accumulate throughout the film, their bodies visible in battle's aftermath reminding viewers that war's cost extends beyond named characters. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this visual honesty distinguishes the film from more sanitized action cinema. Hercules' family, dead before the film begins, haunt every moment of his journey, their absence shaping his choices and their memory driving his psychological arc. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this off-screen death achieves presence through absence. Rhesus's death, occurring off-screen after his capture, denies audiences the satisfaction of witnessing his fate, suggesting that not all narratives receive closure, and that some losses remain unresolved. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this choice comments on historical storytelling. The film's refusal to resurrect or magical heal the wounded maintains commitment to its grounded aesthetic, deaths being permanent and wounds leaving lasting effects, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this realism serves the revisionist approach. The film's exploration of fame and its cost speaks to contemporary celebrity culture while remaining grounded in ancient setting, and these analyses and explanations will examine this dimension. Hercules' fame has brought him nothing but suffering, his reputation attracting Eurystheus' murderous envy and making his family targets, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this critique of celebrity resonates beyond the film's mythological context. Iolaus' storytelling, while intended to honor his uncle, contributes to the legend that Hercules finds burdensome, suggesting that even loving representation can become oppressive, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this dynamic reflects tensions in biographical portrayal. The mercenary band's relative anonymity allows them freedom that Hercules lacks, their lack of reputation enabling choices based on circumstance rather than expectation, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this contrast illuminates the costs of fame. Cody's desire for legendary status, his construction of massive statues and claim of divine favor, represents the toxic aspiration to be remembered at any cost, his tyranny driven by hunger for reputation, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this motivation connects to broader themes. The film's final image, the band riding away while Iolaus tells their story, suggests that fame will continue to pursue Hercules regardless of his wishes, that once legend takes hold, no one can escape its grip, and these analyses and explanations will explore the melancholy of this conclusion. The film's use of physical space to convey power relationships deserves detailed analysis, and these analyses and explanations will explore how production design achieves this. Cody's fortress dominates the landscape visually, its walls separating ruler from ruled, and its height suggesting authority derived from elevation above ordinary people. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this spatial symbolism operates. The throne room places Cody's at the far end of a long hall, forcing visitors to approach through space that emphasizes their submission, a classic architectural expression of power that the film employs effectively. And these analyses and explanations will explore how camera placement reinforces this dynamic. The mercenary camp exists in open spaces, its temporary structures suggesting impermanence, and its lack of hierarchy reflecting the band's collaborative nature. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this spatial contrast with the fortress communicates different values. Battlefields become chaotic spaces where planned formations dissolve into individual struggles, the breakdown of order reflecting the chaos of war and the uncertainty of its outcomes. And these analyses and explanations will explore how cinematography captures this spatial confusion. The final toppling of Hera's statue collapses the vertical hierarchy Cody's constructed, bringing divine pretension down to earth level where ordinary people can reclaim their space. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this spatial resolution completes the film's architectural argument. The film's treatment of religious belief and divine authority maintains careful ambiguity that serves its thematic purposes. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this balance is achieved. Characters frequently reference gods and fate, but whether these references reflect genuine belief or cultural habit remains unclear, allowing audiences to interpret according to their own perspectives. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this ambiguity functions. Amphiara's prophecies, presented as probability calculations rather than divine revelation, exemplify the film's rationalist approach while acknowledging that even sophisticated minds seek patterns in chaos. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this characterization bridges ancient and modern worldviews. Hera's statue dominates the visual landscape of Cody's fortress, but the goddess herself never appears or intervenes, suggesting that divine power exists only in human imagination and its physical representations. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this absence comments on religion. Hercules' rejection of divine parentage, his insistence that he is merely human, represents a philosophical position the film neither confirms nor denies, leaving open whether he denies truth or simply resists interpretation. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this uncertainty serves the narrative. The film's conclusion, with justice achieved through human action rather than divine intervention, affirms human agency while leaving space for those who might see the hand of gods in events. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this inclusivity respects diverse audience perspectives. The film's approach to historical authenticity, while acknowledging inevitable compromises, demonstrates engagement with ancient sources beyond Hollywood conventions. And these analyses and explanations will explore this dimension. The armor and weapons, while not perfectly accurate, reflect research into Thracian and Greek military equipment, avoiding the generic fantasy designs that plague many historical films. And these analyses and explanations will examine specific elements that demonstrate this attention. The social structures depicted, with mercenary bands selling services to city-states, reflect actual practices in the ancient Mediterranean, where professional soldiers often fought for various masters. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this historical reality grounds the narrative. The political complexity, with multiple factions pursuing competing interests rather than simple good-evil binaries, captures something of ancient geopolitics where alliances shifted constantly, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this complexity enriches the plot. The religious practices shown, from offerings to statues to prayers before battle, reflect actual ancient customs, even as the film maintains ambiguity about divine reality. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this cultural authenticity supports world building. The film's willingness to acknowledge that our sources for ancient history are fragmentary and often legendary, reflected in Iola's storytelling framing device, demonstrates sophisticated engagement with historiography that many more serious historical films lack. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this meta-historical awareness enriches the viewing experience. The film's representation of gender, while not perfect, offers progressive elements worth examining, and these analyses and explanations will explore how these function. Atlanta's presence in the mercenary band is treated as unremarkable by her companions, her skills earning respect without comment on her gender. Modeling integration that many contemporary workplaces have yet to achieve, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this matter-of-fact representation advances portrayal of women in action cinema. Eugenia's agency, while constrained by her father's control, manifests in her choices to protect her son through whatever means necessary, her actions driven by maternal love rather than romantic interest in the protagonist. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this motivation avoids common pitfalls. The absence of romantic subplot between Hercules and Eugenia, while perhaps disappointing to some viewers, allows her character to exist independently rather than as love interest, her concerns remaining focused on her son and her people, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this restraint serves her characterization. The female prisoners glimpsed in Cody's dungeons represent the many women who suffer under tyranny, their presence acknowledging that war's costs fall on all genders, even when narratives focus on male combatants, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this background detail expands the film's scope. The film's limitation remains its focus on male characters, reflecting both source material and genre conventions. But within those constraints, it makes thoughtful choices about female representation, and these analyses and explanations will examine whether this constitutes progress or merely minimal compliance. The film's exploration of mentorship and legacy weaves through character relationships, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this theme operates. Hercules' training of Thracian soldiers represents the transmission of knowledge from experienced warrior to novices, his willingness to share skills suggesting openness he otherwise lacks, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this mentorship contrasts with his emotional isolation. Iolaus' role as storyteller and chronicler represents a different kind of legacy, the preservation of deeds through narrative that will outlast any individual life, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this function connects to ancient epic traditions. Amphiaraus's guidance of the younger mercenaries, his wisdom earned through years of experience, models mentorship based on respect rather than authority, his advice offered when requested rather than imposed, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this approach reflects the band's collaborative values. Tydeus's death leaves a legacy of redemption, his sacrifice demonstrating that even those who struggle with their nature can find meaning, a lesson that will remain with his companions, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this legacy functions within the narrative. Young Arius, placed on the throne at film's end, represents the hope that just leadership can be cultivated in the next generation, his education presumably guided by his mother and informed by the liberation he witnessed. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this generational dimension extends the film's vision beyond immediate events. The film's use of weather and natural elements to reflect emotional states demonstrates classical cinematic technique effectively employed, and these analyses and explanations will explore specific examples. The storm that accompanies Hercules' nightmares externalizes internal turmoil, lightning illuminating the Cerberus hallucination as thunder underscores his screams, creating visceral connection between psychology and environment, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this technique communicates without exposition. The calm before the final battle, with dawn breaking over the fortress, creates tension through contrast, the beauty of nature indifferent to human conflict about to unfold, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this juxtaposition comments on human significance. Dust and smoke from battles obscure vision and create confusion, placing viewers in the same limited perspective as combatants, unable to see the full picture of unfolding events, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this sensory limitation enhances immersion. The firelight of camp scenes creates intimacy and warmth, suggesting the comfort the mercenary band finds in one another despite their dangerous lives. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this lighting choice supports emotional content. The final ride away from Thrace takes place under clear skies, the weather reflecting Hercules' psychological liberation after years of stormy guilt. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this visual resolution completes the environmental arc. The film's treatment of honor and reputation examines how these concepts function in warrior cultures, and these analyses and explanations will explore this dimension. The mercenary band operates on a code of professional reliability, completing contracts as agreed regardless of personal feelings about clients, a pragmatic honor based on keeping one's word rather than abstract ideals, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this code differs from traditional heroic honor. Hercules' rejection of his legendary reputation stems from belief that he doesn't deserve honor, his guilt making him feel unworthy of the esteem others offer. A psychological twist on conventional honor narratives, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this internal conflict deepens the theme. Rhesus fights for his people's survival rather than personal glory, his honor deriving from protection of dependence rather than accumulation of fame, representing an alternative warrior value system. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this contrast illuminates different conceptions of honor. Cody's obsession with legacy, his construction of monuments and claim of divine favor, represents honor pursued through reputation rather than action. Its emptiness revealed when his statue becomes his tomb, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this critique of external honor functions. The film ultimately suggests that genuine honor consists of right action regardless of recognition. Hercules' choice to fight for the oppressed without expectation of reward embodying this value, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this conclusion updates classical honor for contemporary audiences. The film's choreography of group combat sequences demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how multiple fighters interact, and these analyses and explanations will explore technical aspects of these scenes. The mercenary band fights as a coordinated unit, each member's style complementing others, with Atlanta providing range support while Tydeus engages at close quarters and Autolycus exploits opportunities. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this coordination is visualized. The phalanx formation taught to Thracian soldiers emphasizes collective action over individual heroics, shields interlocked creating a mobile fortress that protects all participants. And these analyses and explanations will explore how this tactical choice reinforces thematic concerns about community. Hercules' fighting style adapts to circumstances, sometimes overwhelming opponents through brute strength and other times employing tactical patience, demonstrating the intelligence beneath his physical power, and these analyses and explanations will examine how this adaptability reflects his character. The chaos of large-scale battles is rendered through camera movement and editing that conveys confusion without losing coherence, allowing viewers to track action while experiencing its disorder, and these analyses and explanations will explore how this balance is achieved technically. The final assault integrates the freed prisoners into the fighting, their raw vengeance contrasting with the mercenaries' professional skill, creating visual variety while advancing the theme of collective liberation. And these analyses and explanations will examine how this integration serves both action and meaning.